I want to say very warmly a welcome to John Haller, who is a pretty frequent reoccurring guest on the Minute to Midnite Show, and we are back today with a few interesting things to discuss. So it's good to be talking to you again, John.
Good to talk to you again, Tony.
These discussions are always interesting and the time always flies, that's for sure.
Well, maybe tonight we'll run out of things to talk about. I'm a trial lawyer, and I had a long deposition this afternoon. I used to do 4 or 5 of these things in a week, and now the whole system has changed here in the United States. Trial work is not what it used to be, and so I don't do that many depositions anymore. We have trouble training our young lawyers to be trial lawyers because nothing goes to trial. All the judges try to push you into a settlement. Settlement meaning that nobody's happy.
Okay.
That's what a judge considers to be a good settlement. So it's very often not based on what facts and law are, but we have some things to talk about tonight that relate to facts and law. That's for sure.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned changes, or just very quickly. I won't spend much time on it, but yeah, we're just having very quickly changed gun laws in New Zealand that are, well, I think they become law today. Even banning of semi-automatic weapons or anything bigger than a semi-automatic 22. You can have a 10-round semi-automatic 22, but you can't, or a 5-round semi-automatic shotgun, but you can't have anything bigger than that. So then they're going to be doing a gun buyback scheme, which there's still, got to come out with the details of that. But it's kind of like everything's just changing so quickly. And what's really weird is I notice that courier companies around New Zealand are pretty much not even shipping any sort of firearms or firearm accessories at the moment. It's just kind of gone off the deep end in some ways.
So let me ask you a question for the practicality. So popular guns here in the U.S. are 9mm, 45s, 380s.
Well,
would those be banned?
We can't own any handguns in New Zealand. The only people with handguns in New Zealand are people with a special Class B pistol license, and the only place they can use those is at a range. You can't shoot them anywhere else. So we've already got basically only a handful of pistols in New Zealand. But in terms of rifles and stuff, that's where it's changing.
Okay, so you've never been able to own handguns?
No.
In the recent past. Okay, so America's much different. In fact, there's a fairly viral video out there that actually happened on what they call the Magnificent Mile in Chicago just the other day. An elderly man, and when I say elderly, I'm 65, so elderly to me is somebody older than me. He was walking into a McDonald's on Michigan Avenue there in this very upscale shopping area, and these 2 young men came up and started beating him. I mean, they were ripped. I think he had a Donald Trump hat on, and there were all these people inside the McDonald's that were filming it, and they went behind an ad in the window there, and then the guys that were beating him started backing up, and the guy came out from behind the ad with a pistol. And you could see the gun on his hip when they were beating on him, and he pulled a gun on them, and then all these people at McDonald's going, no, no, no. So it was okay for this old man to be being beaten, and nobody said anything. But when he pulled a gun to defend himself against 2 young guys, then everybody got upset. This is just another example of the world having gone completely crazy. In my view, and I think that's prophetic. I mean, the world loses its mind in the end times, and I have no doubt that that's happening.
Well, you mentioned a guy with a Trump hat. Well, so we had a situation yesterday apparently where some guy with a Trump T-shirt with Trump for New Zealand or something on the T-shirt was abusing Muslims outside a mosque. Well, one of the mosques where the shooting were in New Zealand. So, of course, now that's made big news today that some Trump-supporting guy, and they've arrested him or whatever for being disorderly. But I mean, all this stuff is just insane. I mean,
wait, who got arrested? The Trump guy?
Yeah, because he was yelling out abuse or something at the Muslims. So, I mean, but that was a pretty idiotic thing to do. But the thing is here, it's just everyone's on such edge at the moment. And we've, New Zealand, for example, is different in America, that the police are not generally walking around with arms. But at the moment, in various places, they're highly armed. And I suspect it's getting people ready to accept that as part of the future, New World Order sort of future. Anyway.
Well, you got to see some of the police cars here in the U.S. You drive around, and maybe you've seen them when you're here. They look like portable TV studios because they have cameras mounted front, two front, two rear cameras. The cops have body cams and everything, and it's just.
Well, I think here in New Zealand, because we've had this sort of reputation as being the number one safest country in the world and the most peaceful country, either number one or number two usually. And so if they can do this to New Zealand, where all of a sudden New Zealand, because we don't, the police have generally not walked around with guns yet. They have one locked in the boot and they have one under the seat, but they have them locked away, so they don't normally carry them here, not like America. So this is a big change for New Zealand, what we're seeing at the moment. It's all kind of topsy-turvy, and there's but the fact that they're able to rush through the law very quickly, whether I'm for it or against it, I'm not really going to say, either way here. All I'm looking at is how quickly it's being done, and that's the biggest concern in a way. Now, just moving off that topic, another thing that's been very interesting to note is what's happened overnight with Julian Assange being arrested in London. I'm just wondering on your thoughts on that.
I have mixed emotions about Julian Assange. I do think that he did some things that were potentially very damaging to U.S. national security. I know that people that lean more, that are more libertarian than I am, would probably disagree quite a bit with that. But he's been indicted. He's going to be extradited to the United States by all stretches of the imagination. There's a multi-count indictment that was filed. You can find it online. It's interesting too. We've had previous discussions about the allegations or the claims that there are 100,000 sealed indictments in the United States that are just waiting to be unsealed. Well, here's an example of an indictment that was unsealed today because he was arrested. Now, I don't know when I'd have to check the court docket to see when the unsealing actually took place, but I'm pretty sure that it certainly was unsealed today, and it's available online. It's 97 pages long. So Assange is in a good bit of trouble.
Well, one thing I find interesting is basically, in a sense, Donald Trump got into power on the coattails of a lot of Assange's revelations because of the exposing of Hillary and the emails. And Trump, during the election campaign in 2016, seemed to be all in favour of that and kind of praising it. Now we come down to this point, he's saying he doesn't know much about WikiLeaks, and under the Trump administration, Assange is the one that's being prosecuted. It's like, I don't know, without sort of stating too much, I just think it's pretty interesting that that's the way it's gone down.
Well, it's it is an interesting thing to watch because I agree with you that the argument can be made, and it's being made, that Assange assisted Trump in being elected. But President Trump has a tendency to make rather, I would say, divergent streams of thought come from him at times. So, there was his encouragement during the election for Assange to release what he had. Ultimately, I'm not sure how much it swayed people to vote one way or the other. I mean, we are such a divided country anymore that I think people have pretty much made up their mind. And this is something that I see everywhere that I look. Every country, the elections are very, very close. So I just don't know how much of an impact Assange ultimately had in the election. Of course, the Democrats here in the U.S., they're going to claim that it was all Assange's fault. Assange and Trump were working together. They ignore the fact, of course, that Hillary Clinton left her emails and the Democratic National Party left their email and other computer information horribly exposed to the public in a very unsecure fashion. But we'll see what happens. But I think Mr. Assange is going to come here, and I haven't looked at the indictment. I think the indictment that I've seen from back in 2018, I think is when it was originally filed, mentions this Bradley or Chelsea Manning and how they work together. So, Manning has essentially been let off. I think he received either he or she, excuse me, I don't want to trigger anyone. He or she received some kind of a commutation of their sentence from the Obama administration on the way out. So I'm not sure if in that situation why they're going after Assange.
Is Chelsea Manning not back in jail at the moment, though?
I thought he was released from prison.
Okay,
but I don't know. I'll have to check it. It gets very difficult to follow the players sometimes.
It does. The thing is, I guess what I find interesting is the fact that we've got all these other censorship things happening at the moment. For example, with the New Zealand, the shooting video and so on from that guy was basically banned, and now they're making inroads into Facebook and all the social media as a result to sort of police them more and ban different things. And then you've got this happening at the same time as a bunch of other censorship things. I've seen people sending me things of Christian channels being censored. In fact, the Brazilian government basically threatened to sue YouTube unless they took down a video of somebody who was part of basically, I think, an African sort of demon worshipping religion of the past, and has been set free from that, and had a video on it. And the Brazilian government's basically told them it must be taken down as hate speech because it's basically against this voodoo type religion, and so they're actually censoring, well, all sorts of things. And then this happens with the situation with Assange, and I'm just wondering whether it's all linked in some way to the shutting down of dissenting voices and censorship of anyone that doesn't agree with the government.
Right. Well, I think one takeaway from it might be that, at least with regard to some of the claims made about all these sealed indictments in the U.S. and all these things coming down, because this seems to be at odds with Trump's interest. And I think it shows you that the Justice Department in the United States does sort of operate in its own orbit. They're not highly controlled by the president. He can appoint U.S. attorneys, but U.S. attorneys have a lot of power as to what they do. And in fact, I have said many, many times that the person in the United States government system that you need to be most afraid of is the prosecutor. And that would include U.S. attorneys and assistant U.S. attorneys. And I have seen it over and over again. One of the attorneys in my firm represented one of the accused in the Duke Lacrosse case. And in that case, there was a rogue prosecutor who literally, I don't know if they've ever recovered from it, but he literally destroyed the lives of a number of young men over specious allegations that were made about sexual assault. I actually talked to one of the lead attorneys in that one night. She called the office to ask me about another case and the recommendation of my partner who was working on the case. And I asked her, I said, was it as bad as the press made it out to be? Because it sure seemed horrible what was happening to these young men. And she said what the prosecutor was doing was far worse than what you saw in the press. So that that's what I think Christians need to be most concerned about, are rogue prosecutors, because they can bring these cases. You have to pay your own attorney. And I can tell you that the cost of defending yourself mount up very, very quickly. So this is increasingly becoming a bigger issue. I would call it lawfare. That's what some people have termed it, that they sue you almost into oblivion. This is going to happen in the United States if this Equality Act ever becomes law. The Equality Act is to essentially bring transgender and same-sex LGBT issues into the discrimination law in the United States. But what it has done is that there was a law passed a number of years ago called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And the Religious Freedom Restoration Act would protect you. You would be able to use your free exercise of religion as a defense. This law, if passed, would say, no, RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, would not be applicable. And you could not use that claim as a defense in any lawsuit against you for discrimination. So, for example, the Colorado Baker case, he would not be able to say, well, I was only refusing to do a cake for the same-sex wedding on the basis of it was against my religious beliefs. So that will have an enormous impact, if that is ever passed, on religious freedom and the free exercise of religion in the United States. And this is part of the agenda. Now, whether it will pass is anybody's guess. It'll certainly pass the House. It might pass the Senate, though, because who wants to vote against equality in an election year, or as you're nearing a congressional, Senate, or presidential election? And then the question becomes, if it is passed, does President Trump veto it? I think he would, but I don't have any assurance that things are going to go well in these situations at this point in time.
No, it's interesting that basically it's equality, supposedly, but you have no equal voice to have a different opinion than supporting whatever it is, the LGBT movement or whatever. You're discriminated against in a sense if you don't follow that. It's all so topsy-turvy. I mean, it's just hard to believe this is where it's come to from what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And we're facing all the same sort of issues in New Zealand, and I think it's a global agenda, really.
Right.
One other thing, because we've got the Israeli elections to talk about, but have you been following this Brexit saga at all, where it just seems to become almost a joke? Are they ever, going to get the UK out of the European Union, or is this all again just part and parcel of a plan to create chaos?
Well, I think things are moving on two levels there. One is whether they're ever going to get some kind of action in the British Parliament to allow Brexit to take place, to accept the agreement, negotiate more terms. It's effectively kicked the can down the road. But I think the other aspect of this, at least I'm seeing some reports and rumblings about this, is that regardless of what the UK decides to do, they're out of the EU. And in France and Germany are taking some pretty strong steps to make that a reality, whether Brexit happens or not. So it's been interesting. France and Germany, we were talking a lot about them a year ago. Angela Merkel's almost disappeared from the scene. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But I do think that there are some things going on behind the scenes that the UK is out of the EU regardless of what happens.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, the elections in Israel, of course, have just happened, and one thing that I note it was basically a day after the elections, the US National Security Advisor John Bolton told ABC that he thinks Trump's peace plan will be published in the very near future. But I also saw in another article basically that that though the peace plan bears Donald Trump's name, its authors trying to stop leaks, obviously being Jared Kushner and Greenblatt, that Donald Trump doesn't even know or hasn't even seen the full plan himself anyway. So, and there's various opinions about whether it'll be, some say June, mid-June, it'll be unveiled, and others are saying, it could be rolled out as early as this month. Just wondering what your thoughts on what's happened.
The reports I saw that I probably give the most credibility to, everything's based on a bit on speculation right now, because I don't know that there's very many people that have seen this. I think that I would tend to agree with the fact that the president may not know the details of this. I think this has largely been the work of Jared Kushner. I don't think there's any question about that. The report that I saw that I probably gave the most credibility to, I think it came out of the Times of Israel last weekend, that the report would be published on May 15th. That's a fairly significant date, in that that's the day that the Palestinians celebrate what they call Nakba Day, Catastrophe Day. It's the day after Israel declared its independence on May 14th, 1948. So every year they have Nakba Day protests throughout the Palestinian areas. But I think too, though, that the election in Israel may advance the date on which that plan, whatever it is, will be revealed. I've been doing a lot of digging, trying to find, like everybody else, trying to find out what the plan is. There was a report in Al Akbar magazine, or a news service out of Lebanon last weekend, that part of the plan would be that Palestinian refugees that are in Lebanon and Syria, well, again, we're pretending that there is really a country still called, that there's a country that can still be called Syria. I think there's a little enclave that Assad controls, and then the rest is still kind of a mess of rubble and rebel groups and a bunch of factions fighting that nobody gets along with. But in Lebanon and Jordan, they would be granted citizenship. They would be granted full citizenship in those countries. The payoff, or the flip side of that, is they would have to give up any claim that they have a right to return to what's known as the West Bank. I don't know that they would accept that. There were some pretty significant aid packages that were supposed to go along with that. Reports being that there was something pledged from Arab countries and Gulf state countries. They were promised somewhere north of $100 billion in aid if they would grant citizenship to the Palestinian refugees living within their country. Now, this raises an interesting point. I may have mentioned in the past that I went to the Christ at the Checkpoint conference in Oklahoma, the first American one that they've held. This is a very pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel group. But I went because I wanted to see what they were saying. And I did have a chance to talk to one of the speakers. I sat next to him at dinner. He was the featured speaker in the evening right after we had dinner. And I asked him questions about the fact, and I specifically asked him these questions. Why do you not protest against Jordan? Why don't you protest against Syria? Why don't you protest against Lebanon? Because none of these countries grant full citizenship rights to the Palestinian refugees that have lived there for 70 years. And I asked him some very pointed questions, and he was from Gaza, very intelligent man, an oncologist now living in Toronto area. And I asked him, I said, why don't you protest these countries? Well, it's not their fault, it's the occupation. But this is a problem I've pointed out many times in the recently, that these people don't have citizenship rights in the countries in which they've lived for 70 years. There are certain jobs that they can't hold. They can't participate in voting for the parliaments or the legislatures in the states where they live. So they complain about this being true with regard to Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. And I heard an American news guy or commentator, more of a commentator than a news guy, spouting off about the fact that the Palestinians are denied rights in Israel and they can't even vote and that sort of thing. But nobody ever mentions the millions of Palestinians that live in Arab countries that are denied the exact same rights. It's one of those little inconsistencies. So the interesting part of the peace plan or Trump plan, whatever it's called, the peace plan, is that they might grant these citizenship rights to these Palestinians, in return for which they will not seek to return to the area of the West Bank, because biblical Judea and Samaria. That's an interesting aspect. The other interesting aspect, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm always trying to connect the dots when I see things reported. So one of the things I noticed was right in the midst of this, that there's $100 billion that's being pledged by the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, to get the Palestinians to that are outside of Israel to stay where they are. The Aramco came out with a report that they had made about $110 billion, about that exact amount of money in profit last year. It was more profit than Apple, Facebook, Twitter, and some other companies made combined. So it's by far the most profitable company in the world. It gives them a lot of power. And so if Kushner has been intelligent enough to tap into that source of money to try to accomplish something here that no one else has accomplished, this could be very different than anything we've seen before. So now, what does it mean from, we always, we're interested in Bible prophecy. What does it mean from a Bible prophecy standpoint? I really can't say. I mean, there's a lot of speculation out there about this. Everybody seems to be in hyperdrive about everything that's going on in the world, and there's plenty to be concerned about. I'm more concerned about this transgenderism issue and what it's doing to children, and how people are, the hypersexualization of children. That's everybody seems to be okay with, but then if somebody makes a pass at a woman in the context of an employment relationship, then that person is out. I mean, and there have been, in big law firms in the United States, there have been some pretty significant people that have been ousted from their firms. And these are very high profile, very high powered, and very wealthy lawyers that have just been axed because they were too aggressive in asking someone out for a date. Now, sometimes they went way, way over the line. But in that context, everybody gets all upset about it. But then we have this hypersexualization of children that's occurring. And I get reports, Tony. I get it from Australia. I get them from New Zealand. I get them from England, the United Kingdom, Canada, the United States, the things that these young children are being taught. That's very troubling. But everybody's in hyperdrive about everything. For example, last weekend, Obama gave a speech in Germany, in Berlin. And there were a number of YouTube videos and blogs and that sort of thing, prophecy-related news things, that Obama was giving a speech at the seat of Satan in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin. Well, the place where the seat of Satan, the Pergamum altar that they brought from Pergamus in Turkey, is closed for renovation. It has been closed for renovation for about 4 or 5 years now. It was supposed to reopen this year, I believe, but it's been pushed back to 2023 now. I don't understand what kind of renovation they're doing that's going to take 7 or 8 years. This seems very odd to me. But the point of what I'm trying to say is everybody was running around, Obama's giving a speech at the seat of Satan. I just don't think that was necessarily accurate. He was in Berlin, and he was in the sort of in the neighborhood of where the Pergamon Museum was. But the Pergamon Museum, as I said, that part of the Pergamon Museum has been closed for renovation for a few years now, and will continue to be for another 4 years.
Oh, that's interesting. I did see the headlines for those articles. To be honest, I didn't actually read them, but I did notice people were sending those around. And back to the LGBT thing for a minute. I think Tasmania, which is a state, a little island off Australia, I believe they may have actually just passed a law there that means people don't have to declare their gender on a birth certificate. It's like, so you don't have to say whether it was born a boy or a girl. It's kind of insane, really. So you're born as a genderless thing, and then you can choose whatever it's going to be later. It's just, how does that work with someone's chromosomes? You can't change those.
Well, this is it's about as anti-science as you can get.
Yeah.
And we pretend there was a very good, people might want to look it up. I made reference to it in my prophecy update this past Sunday. The Heritage Foundation here in the United States had a seminar last week on transgenderism. And the interesting thing that the Heritage Foundation did was they brought in radical feminists, a LGBT activist. And the LGBT activist, I mean, she got quite emotional about the fact that while she was attracted to women, now these transgender men were calling her a sexist because she was not attracted to a transgender person that had been born male and was now either transitioning or transitioning. And she just said, I don't have anybody that I can go to. There was a radical feminist. She said that if this Equality Act that I mentioned earlier is enacted into law, it will ruin male-female distinctions at all and destroy feminism. And she was concerned about that. So I've given Heritage props for bringing in people that they probably don't really agree with. But even these people were quite upset about this Equality Act. And then they had a doctor, they're a pediatrician, and he said, look, you're born male or female. That never changes. And yet here we are giving hormone blockers, chemically castrating young boys on the notion that they're really female, when you can do you can give them drugs, you can do the surgeries on them, and they are still genetically males.
Yeah. And
that will never change. And then they had a mother who was just quite emotional about what had happened to her 14-year-old daughter, where essentially she lost control of the ability to participate in her daughter's medical care, and they started giving puberty blockers and hormone treatments to her daughter. It's just which made castration surgery very risky. So this is part and parcel, and I think this is all part of the end times thing that we're talking about. I won't say I had lunch with someone a week ago. I don't know if the person is a Christian. I just mentioned that it seemed that things were a bit chaotic in society. And that person just opened up and they were saying, my goodness, I don't know if I should say it was a he or she. He or she was saying, it's crazy. I don't understand what's going on. All these crazy ideas that people are talking about, and nobody seems to call them on that they're really, really crazy. So I think even secular people, even non-Christian people, can see and sense that something is going on, and something very unusual.
It's actually interesting. I think in many ways, a lot of Christians and churches, particularly those associated with the sort of mega church movement and all that, are oblivious. They're kind of like their heads buried in the sand as to what's actually going on, and still going along this prosperity gospel type of message, and everything is God's got better, your best days are yet to come type of thing, and are not seeing what's really happening. But many people in the world that aren't Christians are actually the ones that are going, hang on, something's really wrong here, and they're the ones that are more concerned than a lot of Christians, and it should be the other way around. It should be the Christians that are awake, and yet it isn't.
Well, there's sort of I guess we would call it the normalcy bias. People don't really want to admit that things aren't anything but normal. You see the normalcy bias kind of surface in strange areas. For example, Ilhan Omar gave a speech at a CARE chapter this past week when she referenced 9/11. Her comment was, some people did some bad things. Somebody did something on 9/11. That's what she said. She wouldn't say what it was that happened or anything like that. It was just somebody did something on 9/11. It was and she's sort of this, rising star in the Democratic Party. It's crazy, but I agree with you that the churches are really, by and large, asleep at the wheel. Through different organizations, I think the Gospel Coalition and an organization called Living Out, which is fully endorsed by Tim Keller. There's a gay Anglican. He identifies as a same-sex attracted gay Anglican priest, Sam Alberry. And I was watching a video that he did. He spoke at Ravi Zacharias Ministries about 6-7 weeks ago. And he talked about the fact that, David was described as beautiful. And it was clear what he was trying to imply when he was talking about that. I found it to be highly offensive, disgusting. I thought to be eisegesis on steroids, where he was reading into the scripture what he wanted there to be. But then he finished up with reference to Isaiah chapter 53, which is the prophecy about the Lord's passion, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And he said he took the verse of, my joints are out of place, and that those verses in that area of Isaiah 53, and said that, Jesus was suffering from body dysphoria just like these people with gender dysphoria are. Now, I played the clip. I got some heat. Oh, you don't understand what he really meant. Now, listen, I've been around church all my life. I had a father who was a very good biblical pastor. I've heard a lot of sermons on Isaiah 53. I've studied Isaiah 53, and believe me, finding support for gender dysphoria in those verses is the furthest thing that I could ever imagine. And the fact that he said this, and then people are running around defending it, I have major problems with it. But it gets even worse. So now Sam Alberry goes around, and on his resume, he says, well, I spoke at Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. And, I was a speaker for RZIM. And look, Zacharias has done a lot of good things. I've appreciated the things that they've done and the work that they've done in apologetics. But then they had an event at the University of Florida a week or so ago in which one of the people involved in Ravi Zacharias Ministries was essentially parroting exactly what Sam Alberry had said about a month ago when he spoke at RZIM. And I have a major problem with that there's this, nobody's minding the store. It's the death of 1,000 cuts. You can die by one big bloody cut, but 1,000 cuts will kill you as dead as one big bloody cut. And this is what I see happening in the church. And I think this is probably the thing that is most indicative of the times in which we live is this deterioration of the church. And as you mentioned, no one really taking time to defend the truth, to defend the scripture, and say, we're not going to participate in this. Instead, they're worried about, goodness, there's a pastor down in South Carolina that used to be with Joel Osteen's ministry, and there's a blog site, there's a page on Instagram to track the sneakers and fashion accessories that pastors in these megachurches are wearing.
Yeah.
And this pastor, I saw it the other day. He had his sneakers. If you buy them online, they're $5,660 for the pair. Now, and you see them. They post pictures of them prancing around the stage, preaching in these designer jeans and sweatpants that cost $1,500 or something like that. I just think we've really lost our way in that regard. It's very troubling.
And a lot of them, they sort of have this, I suppose, we're a church for what we're for, not a church for what we're against type of mentality. And in other words, they won't stand up against sin or against things that are going wrong in the world or end times events because they won't touch that. They just go for the things they say that they're for. In other words, we're for prosperity and we're for making, people's lives better, so we don't touch those other things. This is, and we get people saved. Well, what sort of salvation? Is it really salvation, or is it just people buying into some other Jesus that's going to make them prosperous and happy rather than actually saved? But I think that's what's, largely happening in many of these churches. So they don't stand up against the things that the Bible has traditionally called sin, because that's, we don't want to be seen to be standing against or discriminating against anyone, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I've seen this happen. I went back and dug out a talk that my father gave at a national conference of the church denomination fellowship that we belong to from 1970, almost 50 years ago. And it's funny, he talked about a lot of the same things that I talk about. So I can't remember specifically him teaching about that, but maybe, it did get ingrained to me because he talked about these things all the time and the departure from the truth. And that was 50 years ago. I shudder to think what he would think if he saw the nonsense that was going on today. So the church thing is very troubling. The LGBTQ, the transgender thing, the way that it's you can't even identify what sex a person is. My nephew recently had little twin girls 3 months ago, and he said, we had the twins are here, and I'm like, oh, have you decided what their gender is yet? And everybody in the family text message group, everybody kind of said, ha ha, there's crazy Uncle John again, trying to interject these things into it. But I was, there's a lot of states now where you have gender is unidentified on birth certificates. It's insanity. Everybody asks, did you have a boy or a girl? But now you're not supposed to even ask that question. It's crazy.
It is crazy. You just wouldn't have believed a few years ago that it could actually get to this. Having said that, I do remember hearing someone saying a number of years ago, it would have been probably in early 1990s, maybe even the late 80s, I think it was the 90s, saying that this was the agenda. And I just thought it was crazy at the time. It's like I couldn't ever see it happening. But they were dead right. And I believe from memory that person was someone that had come out of the transgender movement themselves. So and had got saved. And they were saying this is basically the kind of end goal. And now it's happening, and it's pretty crazy. But it's only one of so many things that are going on.
Yeah. Well, we were going to talk about the Israeli elections, so maybe we should do that. I don't think the election results were a surprise ultimately, but I was sort of digging into some of the data on the election. Clearly, the right is in control of the Israeli government. It was fairly easy for Netanyahu to get his majority coalition. It's not going to change much. They might even be a little bit stronger now than they were before. There were but the election was very close. At one point, before some of the last votes came in, there was really only about a 14,000 vote difference between the Likud party and the Blue and White party that was headed up by Danny Gantz and Lapid. So it was a very, very close election. There were some surprises, the New Right Party that now currently Education Minister and Education Minister Naftali Bennett and Justice Minister Shaked started a new party called the New Right Party. They fell they were very, very close, but I think they needed to get 3.25% of the vote total to get 4 seats in the Knesset. They got 3.22%. And it looks like now that they won't have any seats in the new legislature and the new Knesset. So that was a bit of a surprise. But I think one of the things I saw underlying themes behind the election, and even though Netanyahu's facing an indictment and that sort of thing, when you really boiled it down, the difference between the blue and white party and Likud on security issues, they were virtually indistinguishable. So when there's not a stark difference on something security is very, very important to Israelis. If you've spent any time there, I've spent a little bit of time there. It is one of the most they are security conscious everywhere you go. You see soldiers walking around with guns all the time, sitting there in the Jewish quarter of the old city or other places on the bus and that type of thing with their rifles. And there's security cameras everywhere. I mean, there are security in the old city. You can't breathe without being on a security camera. It's one of the most surveillance, high degree of surveillance, more so than almost any place that I've ever seen. Although I would say we were in London last fall, and I would say London is probably close to what you would see in Israel. So the security issue was always a big concern to the Israelis. And because there wasn't a way to distinguish between the blue and white party under Danny Gantz and Likud under Benjamin Netanyahu, I think people just decided to stay with what they knew.
It's pretty close, though. There's only 1 seat difference, isn't there? 36 to 35 at this point.
But there's a number of, like the next largest party, I think there are 40 parties that ran people for this election. It's it's kind of it seems like an insane system. You have the ultra-Orthodox party, then you have kind of the sort of Orthodox party, then you have the left-wing party. Likud did the best that they've done in 15 years, the best they've ever done under Netanyahu. The Labor Party, which used to be a major force in Israeli politics, only ended up with 6 seats in the new Knesset. So the left has really withered away because I think there's a reality check. I mean, people are concerned about security. They see what happens. They see what happens with Gaza and the rockets that come from Gaza and the fire balloons and that sort of thing. They see what Hezbollah is doing, and they're concerned about what's going on up in the Golan with Iran and Hezbollah sort of infiltrating themselves into the Syrian army up there and making themselves appear as Syrian army regulars. And so they're concerned about that. So I know there's a lot of different views about Israel. I'm personally, I'm a big fan, I guess. I think it's a great country. I don't think it's perfect. I think there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of things going on within Israel. I mean, you have the people pushing for the building of a third temple. They seem to be getting more and more traction as time goes along. How that would ever happen in the current geopolitical environment, I don't know. But what Trump proposes to come out with in the next couple of weeks who knows what it will do? I mean, could it provoke a war? And the result of that war is they would be able to build their temple. I don't know. It's a very fluid situation, that's for sure.
Yeah, and we probably haven't got time now to get into that, but yeah, we've definitely been watching the Third Temple thing very closely, and I think Mike and Joni and I may be actually going to be discussing that in a few days' time in another show, because that's a whole issue in itself. But yep, there's a lot of traction going on with that at the moment. So we better look at wrapping up, John, have you got any final thoughts that you'd like to get across?
Well, I think the thing that I would just sort of thinking off the top of my head here, I try to be, and I'm not. When I say this, it sounds like I'm pointing to myself as the example. But I think there's a tendency in this day and age to run with a lot of hype.
Yeah, I agree.
And I would just encourage people to kind of not get too wrapped up in that. I mean, look, there are all these videos. You know, there was the Revelation 12, September 23 thing. What was that? A year and a half ago?
Yeah.
And I saw those videos. I read the blogs and that type of thing, and I just didn't find it to be very convincing. But I see people running with, well, look, there's something going on. Okay, everywhere I look, there are events that are taking place, weather events and that sort of thing, that everybody describes as unprecedented. I just was talking to somebody today who was visiting California, who lives in Idaho, and he told me, I don't know when I'm going to get to go home because there are massive flooding and roads washed out and boulders coming down mountains in Idaho. Somebody in Oregon sent me a message this afternoon, said their power is out, roads are flooding, there's massive rains that are taking place in Oregon. We have this another winter storm making its way across the Midwest plains. Yet I'm sitting here in Columbus, Ohio, and it's 84 degrees. It's beautiful today,
Yeah, wow.
And yet there's blizzards out in Minnesota and North Dakota and Denver, and everything is just everywhere I look, these things are happening. Somebody from South America, from Ecuador, sent me pictures of massive flooding that's taking place in Ecuador right now, from rains in the mountains that are coming down the Andes and rivers that are washing. It's everywhere you look. Now, some people would say, well, that's all man-made and all man-caused. I'm not sure. I don't agree with that. I think that God may be trying to get people's attention. It was very interesting back in about 3 weeks ago, I noticed, I track all these newspapers. I have a subscription to a thing called Press Display or pressreader.com. And it gives me access to about 6,000 newspapers around the world every day. And I can go through each country and I can look at the news front pages of all the newspapers in that country. And I noticed that around March 16th to 19th, all of the front pages of the Iranian newspapers were frozen. Around that time, Rouhani gave a speech and said, everybody should curse Israel and curse the United States. Put all your curses on them. Well, since then, Iran has been inundated with these unprecedented historical flooding events in 25 out of the 31 provinces in Iran. And for almost from about the 19th of March until April 6th, there were virtually, at least what's online on that particular application or website, none of the Iranian newspapers were updated. Some of the websites would update certain news stories, but everything seemed to shut down in Iran. Now, is it because of the floods? Is there something else going on? I don't really know. But it's just, again, it's just another example of unprecedented events happening everywhere. Fires in California, fires here, floods here, snow here, late season snow. It's so the world's very volatile. So there's plenty to talk about without becoming a slave to the hype that gets involved sometimes. So the example being Obama speaking at Satan's throne. Good people put that up, but that's not exactly what happened. He went to that area of Berlin, but he didn't go to the museum. he's already given a speech on a stage that looks like Satan's throne anyway. But so I just encourage people to kind of dial back the hype. There's plenty of stuff going on without getting caught up in the hype.
Yep, and people should just get back into, I guess first and foremost, we need to get back into reading the Bible for ourselves and seeking God for ourselves and not get everything from the internet largely. Thank you, though. Obviously, the internet is important, so thanks for what you've brought out today, John. It's been a discussion on a lot of different things, but I guess the central theme is the fact that we are in turbulent times and we need to get our focus on Jesus, really, don't we? And
and if you want to check out our videos, if you can find them, everything that I put up on a prophecy update pretty much goes into restricted mode right away now. And there's some weeks where I'm sure that the Fellowship Bible Chapel YouTube channel is being shadow banned by
Well, I know we get the same. A Minute to Midnight's exactly the same. Just tell them the YouTube channel again, the name of it, John.
Fellowship Bible Chapel, or my name, John Haller, Haller, should bring it up to you. We post all of our videos, teachings, the little conferences that we have at church. We made a decision a long time ago to put all that stuff up online. So we've been pretty consistent. You can pray for us, though. We seem to have an inordinate amount of internet issues some Sundays. I'm sure it's just our church is in a bit of a rural area on the outskirts of Columbus, but it seems like we've had a lot of computer crashes, internet issues recently. I'm not sure why that is. And we've worked very, very hard to make sure we have good internet connection. So it's somebody trying to attack us. I don't know. If people want to go and subscribe to the YouTube channel, we would appreciate that. Of course, that helps us a little bit with reaching more people.
Awesome. Well, thanks, John, and we'll have to get back in a few weeks' time again and have another discussion because they're always really interesting.
Well, we might actually have a Trump plan, Middle East plan to talk about in a few weeks.
Could do, yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Folks, don't forget to like this video and share it if you're watching it on YouTube or on our website, aminutemidnight.com. You'll find it as well, and also as audio on iTunes and on the aminutemidnight.com website. And don't forget, we do run A Minute to Midnight 100% by donations. That's why we don't do any advertising or anything like that. And if you want to help keep A Minute to Midnight running, you can donate at aminutemidnight.com, and we really do appreciate the small number of people that do donate to us. Couldn't keep this running without your help, so thank you heaps for that. And all the music is written, played and recorded by me, and if you want to download any of it, including this track, you can do that at aminutemidnight.com too. We do have a forum that you can join and contribute to as well there, so you're welcome to join it. And that's it for this show. We'll be back in a few days' time. God bless and have a great week.